The great
We were
galactic
the ones
library
who wrote
floated
it
in
all.
silence above a bright blue star, its towers shining with silver light, and its walls carved with symbols from hundreds of species. Every visitor who saw it felt both wonder and fear, for inside this place rested the memory of the galaxy. Every book and every record collected over thousands of years. Every thought from empires that had risen and fallen. It was said that anyone who entered the library could learn the truth of the universe. But not everyone was welcome. Not everyone was trusted. When the humans arrived, they came with hope in their hearts. Their ships were small compared to the vessels of the older races. Their technology was not as advanced as the Lords of the Stars. Yet they carried courage and curiosity, and they believed they had earned the right to stand among the scholars of the galaxy. They came as students who wished to learn, not as conquerors. They came seeking knowledge that might help their world grow, to prove that they were ready to join the great community of minds. At the gates of the library stood the guardians, tall beings with silver skin and eyes that glowed faintly like crystal. They had watched over the library for countless generations, and they did not smile when the human delegation approached. The leader of the humans stepped forward, his voice calm and respectful. He spoke of friendship, of peace, of the human desire to share knowledge with others. He asked for entry into the library, but the guardians only laughed, their laughter cold and sharp, echoing across the shining hall. "You are too young," they said. "You are too violent. You are too dangerous. Your wars are fresh. Your history is filled with blood. Your people are not ready to walk among the books of eternity. The library is for the wise, for the patient, for those who have risen above cruelty." But humans still fight among themselves, still burn their own world, still spill the blood of their kin. Why should such a species touch the greatest treasure of the galaxy? Why should you read the words that shaped civilizations older than your sun? The words cut deep. The humans felt shame and anger. They had known rejection before, for many alien races still viewed them as newcomers. But this insult was heavier, for it was not just about status. It was about their very worth. They were being told that they were unfit to learn, unfit even to read. And in the eyes of the galaxy, there could be no greater humiliation. Their leader clenched his fists, but said nothing. For he knew anger would only prove the Guardians right. Still, the sting of rejection filled the air like fire. Behind the Guardians, through the open gates, the humans caught a glimpse of the library itself. Endless shelves stretching into the shadows. Glowing orbs of light floating like stars above the walkways, books of every shape and size resting in silence, each one a piece of a forgotten world, some made of crystal, some of metal, some of living vines that whispered softly. The sight was almost too much to bear, for it was beauty mixed with pain. They were so close, yet they were denied, and that denial felt like a chain closing around their hearts. One of the humans, a young historian named Mara, could not stop staring at the shelves. Her eyes narrowed as she saw something that made her breath catch. Among the distant rows, she thought she saw familiar lines, familiar marks, the shape of letters she had studied since childhood. Her mind screamed that it was impossible, that no human writing could be here. Yet the shapes were there, carved into the spines of books stacked high. She wanted to shout, to run forward, to prove that humans did belong. But the Guardians blocked the way with shining spears of light. "Leave now," the Guardians said. "Return to your world. Grow wiser if you can. Perhaps one day the galaxy will trust you. But that day is not today." The gates closed with a sound like thunder, and the humans were pushed back toward their ships. They walked in silence, shame heavy on their shoulders. They felt the eyes of other species watching, some with pity, some with scorn, and the sting of failure burned inside them. For they had dreamed of standing among the stars as equals, and now they were cast down like children scolded for daring to reach too high. As the ships of Earth turned away from the shining library, the humans carried with them a wound that words could not heal. Yet deep inside, a fire began to grow. They did not forget the insult. They did not forget the laughter. And they did not forget the glimpse of symbols on the shelves, symbols that whispered of a secret too great to ignore. While the Council of Aliens celebrated their power, and the Guardians returned to their silent watch, One truth had already begun to stir in the shadows. A truth that would not stay hidden forever. The library believed it could keep humanity outside, but the library itself held memories it could not erase. And within those memories were the marks of hands that were not alien, the marks of hands that were human, though no one yet dared to believe it, though no one yet spoke it aloud. The truth waited quietly, buried in the heart of the greatest treasure of the galaxy, and it would soon rise to shatter everything. For the humans had been denied, but they were not blind, and one day they would return to claim what was always theirs. In the silent halls of the great galactic library, the Guardians believed that order had been restored after the rejection of humanity. The gates were closed once more, and the endless knowledge of the galaxy remained under the careful watch of those who thought themselves wise. Yet not every mind in that place was at ease. Among the many scholars who lived inside the library was one named Kalen, a thin and thoughtful being with golden skin and long fingers shaped for turning fragile pages. He was unlike the others, for where they mocked humanity as primitive, he felt only curiosity. Kalen had watched the human delegation leave in silence. He had seen the anger in their eyes and the strange spark of something he could not name. And though the council laughed and returned to their debates, his thoughts remained unsettled. For when the gates had stood open, he too had glimpsed what the young human woman seemed to notice. Strange markings on the spines of several old volumes. Markings that did not belong to any known alien tongue. Markings that carried a shape sharp and simple. A shape that stirred something he had once studied long ago. When night fell inside the library, when the lights dimmed and the halls emptied of students, Kalen moved in secret. He carried no lantern and made no sound. His steps were practiced and soft, for he had done such wanderings many times in search of hidden works. He descended into the lower stacks, where shelves leaned heavy with age, where dust floated like mist and silence pressed close. Here were the oldest writings, works so ancient that even the council had forgotten their origin. And as Kalen's long fingers traced the shelves, he found what he sought. There it was, a book thick and bound in faded leather, strange among crystal tablets and vine scrolls, its spine carved with markings he recognized from the gates. The same markings that had caught the human girl's eyes. He pulled the book free with careful hands and opened it. His heart raced as he saw rows of symbols, each one sharp and deliberate. He could not read them, for no alien tongue followed such patterns. Yet deep inside he knew these were not random. They were a language, a voice, frozen in lines of ink, waiting to be heard again. Kalen hurried back to his chamber, hiding the book beneath his robes. Once there, he placed it upon his desk and studied it under the glow of a small crystal lamp. Page after page filled with the strange letters. No translation offered, no guide to follow. Yet he could not turn away, for there was a rhythm to the symbols, a logic that whispered of meaning just beyond his reach. He compared the letters to alien alphabets, but none matched. He searched the archives of his own mind, and a memory rose, faint and almost forgotten, a lesson about Earth. In that lesson, long ago, he had seen records of human writing, records dismissed as crude and young. Yet now he remembered the shape of those letters, the way they stood straight and clear, and his eyes widened as he realized that the markings on the pages were the same. This was human language, old, impossibly old, placed here long before humans even entered the stars. The book in his hands was not an alien treasure. It was human, and if one such book existed, then perhaps many more were. Hidden throughout the library, unseen, unclaimed, waiting. Kalen felt his heart pound. His mind raced with questions. How could humans, who had only just begun their journey among the stars, have books preserved in the most ancient halls of the galaxy? Who had placed them here? Why had the council never spoken of this? Or had they known all along and hidden the truth? Fear crept into his chest, for if the council discovered his research, he could be punished, stripped of his position, cast out of the library. Yet his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He could not let the mystery remain unanswered. For days, Kalen studied the book in secret, comparing its words with every fragment of human writing he could gather. He sent quiet requests for human text from trade routes, always disguised as unrelated research, scrolls, tablets, and digital files arrived. And the more he compared, the stronger his conclusion became. This was no coincidence. Whole sections of the library bore the mark of humanity: stories, poems, philosophies, works of science and faith, all hidden within the archives. Attributed to no one, their origins erased, and yet every letter sang of human thought, human dreams, human hands. One evening, Kalin dared to speak of his findings to a fellow scholar, a friend named Cyril who often worked beside him. Cyril listened at first with amusement, shaking his head and calling it fantasy. But as Kalin laid the books before him and pointed to the letters, Cyril grew quiet, his laughter fading. Still he shook his head in denial. "Impossible," he said. "Humans are too young. They could not have written texts older than the empires of fire and stone. Perhaps you are fooled by chance, by resemblance, or perhaps the humans forged these works to deceive us." Yet Kalin knew the truth could not be forged. The paper itself was ancient beyond measure. Its ink faded with centuries. No young race could counterfeit such age. And so he pressed on. But Cyril warned him to be careful, for the council would not welcome such claims. They guarded the library not only to protect knowledge, but to control it, to shape the history of the galaxy as they wished. If Kalin proved that humans had been here before, if he revealed that humanity had once shaped the very core of the library, it would shatter their authority. Kalin heard the warning, but he could not turn back. The mystery burned too brightly. He continued to explore deeper into the forgotten stacks, uncovering more and more works that bore the same letters. Entire shelves filled with human writing, some bound in leather, some carved into stone, some pressed into fragile sheets that crumbled at his touch. Each discovery deepened his conviction. Humans were not the students the council believed. They were not newcomers. They were something far older. And the truth of their past had been buried beneath layers of silence and lies. And so the suspicion grew inside Kalin like a storm. Each night he walked the halls in secret. Each day he carried the weight of knowledge that could shake the galaxy. He looked upon the other scholars and wondered how many of them knew. He looked upon the guardians and wondered what they were told to hide. He remembered the faces of the humans cast out from the gates, their shame heavy, their hope broken. And he whispered to himself that their exile was built on a falsehood, for the library was not only theirs, it was also human. Kalin could not rest. The discovery of human words hidden in the library kept his mind awake even when his body longed for sleep. He turned the pages of the leather book again and again, tracing the strange letters with trembling fingers. Each line called to him like a whisper from the past, a voice that demanded to be heard. And though he could not understand the meaning, he felt the weight of it, the gravity of a truth buried under centuries of silence. He knew he must search further, for a single book could not be all there was. He began his search in quiet ways, requesting more works from the distant shelves. His reputation as a careful scholar allowed him to move without raising suspicion, and soon his chamber filled with fragments that carried the same strange letters. Some were whole volumes bound in fabric worn thin with age, some were only shards of stone etched with characters, and some were scraps of parchment so fragile they threatened to crumble at a touch. Kalin compared them to the records he had secretly gathered from traders and travelers who had passed through human space, and the match was undeniable. The symbols aligned perfectly, no mistake, no coincidence. These were the very same letters used by humans. Yet these books were far older than any known human civilization, older than their pyramids, older than their first cities, older even than the first fire lit by their ancestors. If the dating of the library was true, Kalin's heart shook as the implications rose before him. For this meant that humanity's history was incomplete, that their story had been broken, that their past stretched back further than they themselves could imagine, and that the library was hiding it in plain sight. Still, Kalin was careful. He did not tell the council. He did not tell the guardians. He knew they would silence him, call him a liar, or worse, strip him of his place and cast him into exile. Instead, he chose a different path. He spoke in secret to only one more person, a quiet archivist named Delra, who worked in the deep halls where the dust was thick and the records rarely touched. Delra was cautious by nature. her eyes always scanning the shadows as if expecting someone to listen. Yet she, too, was curious. She too felt the weight of the mystery. Kaelin placed the leather book before her and waited. Delra touched the pages with delicate care, her fingers tracing the lines, her eyes narrowing as she read the symbols aloud, though she could not form the sounds correctly. She frowned and said that no alien tongue flowed in such sharp patterns. She admitted she had seen similar markings before, hidden deep in catalogs with no authors listed. Strange works that none could read but none dared to throw away. She had thought them meaningless. But now she saw they carried form and purpose. They carried thought. Together they began the work in secret, night after night. Kaelin searching the shelves above while Delra searched the archives below. They brought together fragments, compared them with care, and slowly the scale of the discovery grew. The great library was filled with human writings, not a handful, not dozens, but thousands, whole collections scattered through the ages, some hidden in plain sight, some buried in forgotten corners. Each one older than the rise of most alien races, each one waiting for someone to recognize it, to claim it, to reveal the truth that had been buried. The more they found, the greater their fear became, for it was clear that someone had hidden this knowledge on purpose. The catalogs gave no names, no dates, no origins. The Council of Scholars never spoke of them. The Guardians ignored them. And yet the works remained, too important to destroy, too strange to explain, so they had been hidden beneath silence, left to gather dust while the galaxy believed its own lies. Kaelin and Delra whispered late into the night, asking themselves why, who, had chosen to bury the truth, and what they feared humanity might remember if it was found. The thought haunted Kaelin. He remembered the faces of the humans driven from the gates, their eyes filled with pain, and he wondered how they would react if they knew that the library was built not only with alien wisdom, but also with the words of their own ancestors, words that the galaxy denied them, knowledge that was their birthright. His chest burned with quiet anger, not the anger of war, but the anger of injustice. For the more he learned, the more he saw that humanity had been wronged, denied not because they were unworthy, but because the truth was dangerous. Still he pressed on, hunger for answers driving him deeper. He spent hours comparing lines, searching for patterns. He found fragments of human myths preserved in languages that predated any alien script. He found philosophical arguments etched in metal plates that matched word for word with writings he had seen from Earth. He found diagrams of stars, of machines, of ideas that humans were only now rediscovering. And all of it pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Humans had been here before. Long before, so long ago that their memory had turned to myth, and the galaxy had erased the rest. Delra trembled as she whispered her fears. If this truth reached the wider council, everything would change. The order of the library would crumble. The authority of the Guardians would collapse. For if the humans had written the first books, if they had left the first records, then they were not students at all. They were teachers returning, and the galaxy would be forced to bow to the hands that had mocked. Kaelin nodded. Yet he could not stop. The truth was too vast, too heavy, too bright to stay hidden. It was a fire that demanded to be seen. And so Kaelin continued his investigation, hiding pages beneath his robes, storing notes in secret compartments, building a map of knowledge that no one else dared to acknowledge. Every new discovery strengthened his conviction. Every new fragment deepened the storm inside his heart. He knew that one day, soon the truth would burst forth, for truth could not be chained forever. Already he felt the walls of the library trembling with secrets too long kept. Already he felt the shadow of humanity, stretching across the shelves, a shadow that would not stay silent, a shadow ready to awaken. Kaelin's secret work had grown too heavy to contain. His chamber overflowed with fragments of human words. His nights stretched long with study, and his heart beat with both fear and determination. He knew the truth could not remain hidden forever, and though Delra begged him to be cautious, to wait, to gather more before revealing what he had found, Kaelin felt the fire in his chest demanding action. For each day he saw the humans treated with scorn across the halls of the galaxy. Each day he remembered the laughter of the guardians at the gates. And each day the injustice grew sharper, like a blade pressed against his spirit. At last he made a choice. He would bring his findings before the council, not as a plea, not as a question, but as evidence, as undeniable proof that the library itself carried human memory at its heart. He gathered the oldest book, the thick leather volume. He gathered shards of stone etched with human letters, and he gathered records of Earth's current writings for comparison. Then he wrapped them in cloth and carried them close to his chest, moving through the library with steps that echoed like thunder in his own mind, though no one else heard. The council chamber was vast, its ceiling arched high like the sky itself, its walls carved with symbols of wisdom from 1,000 worlds. There the scholars sat, tall and stern, their robes heavy with authority, their voices sharp as they debated the matters of knowledge and order. Kalen stepped into the circle, his presence drawing eyes, for he was not one of the great masters, only a careful scholar from the lower stacks. Yet his gaze burned with purpose, and he laid the cloth bundle upon the central table where all could see. At first the council scoffed. They waved their hands and asked what small curiosity he had brought to waste their time. But Kalen spoke with a voice steadier than he had ever known. He told them of the writings he had found, of the countless books filled with strange letters, of the comparisons with human texts. He lifted the leather volume and opened its pages. He pointed to the sharp lines, the patterns, the rhythm of language. He placed beside it a scroll from Earth, and the letters matched. Line for line, shape for shape, undeniable. The chamber grew restless. Some laughed, some frowned, some leaned forward in silence. One of the senior scholars stood and declared that it was a trick, a forgery planted by humans to deceive, but Kalen shook his head and reminded them of the age of the volumes. The ink faded by centuries, the parchment older than the rise of most star empires. No young species could forge such artifacts. He reminded them that these writings had sat within the library long before humans reached the stars, and his voice rose like a storm, demanding they face the truth. The council argued fiercely, voices clashing like blades. Some insisted the works were meaningless relics. Others admitted unease at the clear resemblance, and one demanded that humans themselves be summoned. Let them prove or fail. Let them stand before the words and see if they could read them. Kalen's heart leapt at this, for he knew the humans would recognize the letters at once. He knew their eyes would light with the power of memory, and so he pressed the point until the chamber agreed. The guardians were sent to call for a delegation of humans to return. When the humans entered the council chamber, they carried the weight of bitterness upon their shoulders, for they had not forgotten the sting of rejection. Yet they also carried a spark of hope, for they had been summoned unexpectedly, and hope is a flame that never fully dies. The leader stepped forward, his eyes cautious, and when the council placed the leather book before him, his hands trembled as he touched it. He turned the page. His lips moved, and the words came alive in his voice. Ancient words flowing like water, words no alien could shape, but words as natural to him as breath. Gasps filled the chamber. The scholars leaned close. The guardians shifted uneasily, for the truth could no longer be denied. Here was a human reading a book said to be older than his own species, reading it with ease, understanding its meaning, claiming with every syllable that humanity's voice had never been absent from the library, but had been buried, forgotten, silenced by design or neglect. The leader of the humans looked up, his eyes fierce with both pride and pain, and he asked the council why. Why his people were cast out when their words had been here all along. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. No one wished to answer. No one wished to admit the lie, and so the chamber trembled with unspoken truth. Kalen stepped forward again, his voice carrying through the silence. He declared that the library without humanity was incomplete, that the knowledge within its walls had been shaped by human hands, that the wisdom of the galaxy was born not only from alien voices but from human thought, and that to deny humanity was to deny the library itself. His words rang like thunder, and no one could silence him. The senior scholars argued still, but their voices were weaker now. They could not erase what had been seen. They could not erase the sound of human words filling the chamber. The Guardians shifted once more, their glowing eyes uncertain, for they too knew what they had witnessed. The confrontation had cracked the walls of silence. The lie was breaking, and Kalen knew there was no turning back. The truth had stepped into the open, fragile perhaps, contested perhaps, but alive, and once alive. No truth could be chained again. It would spread, it would rise, it would demand its place. And so the humans stood taller that day, no longer beggars at the gate, but heirs reclaiming what was theirs, and the council, though still divided, felt the weight of history pressing upon them, a weight that could not be ignored. Kalen's heart pounded as he looked at Mara, the young historian who had first glimpsed the letters at the gates. Her eyes burned with vindication, with pride, with the fierce light of a truth finally spoken. And in that moment Kalen understood that the galaxy itself was shifting, the order of knowledge was unraveling, and nothing would ever be the same again. The chamber still trembled with the echo of human words. The council sat in silence, their voices stolen by the weight of what they had heard. The Guardians shifted uneasily at their posts, their glowing eyes dimmed, as though even their ancient duty could not shield them from the truth revealed before all. Kalen stood with his chest rising and falling, his hands gripping the edge of the table. And the humans stood proud, though their faces carried both triumph and sorrow, for victory tasted sharp when won against injustice so deep. The air itself seemed alive with the tension of a truth long buried. The human leader placed the leather book back upon the table, his voice steady though heavy with emotion. He declared that the words he had spoken were not inventions, not tricks, but memory, the memory of his ancestors. And he demanded that the council admit what they had hidden, that humanity's voice had shaped the library since its beginning. The council whispered among themselves, their robes rustling like wind in an empty hall. Some muttered denial, some muttered fear, and some stared at the pages as if the ink itself accused them of lies. And Kalen felt his own heart thunder louder. Then Mara, the young human historian, stepped forward, her hands trembling, yet her eyes alight with fire. She spoke with passion, saying that humanity had been mocked, dismissed as violent, called unworthy, yet the truth was here in ink and stone, in pages older than empires. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade, and she demanded not pity but respect, not mercy but acknowledgement. For her people had not come to the stars as thieves. They had come as the makers of memory, the very architects of knowledge, the ones who had written the first words of the galaxy. The council stirred. One of the elders rose, his face pale and uncertain, and he spoke in a voice that wavered like old wood. He admitted that long ago there had been records of a people who traveled the stars before the rise of the great empires, a people who left writings that no one could read, a people who vanished into silence. And perhaps those records were not myths, as they had claimed. Perhaps they were fragments of humanity, a species that fell and rose again, their memory shattered, their legacy hidden, until now, until this moment of unveiling. Kalen felt his breath catch, for even the elder's half-admission was enough to break the dam. He pressed forward, laying out the other fragments he had found, shards of stone, tablets of crystal, sheets of parchment, each bearing the same unmistakable human letters. He placed them side by side with modern human texts, and a match was clear. The room gasped again. Scholars leaned close. Guardians shifted. No one could deny the evidence. The library was filled with the voice of humanity, not scattered by chance, but woven into its very foundation, a foundation the council had kept hidden. The revelation spread like fire, whispers running through the chamber. Humans were not children of the stars. They were not latecomers. They were the first, their words older than any, their thoughts the seeds of wisdom that had grown into the galaxy's greatest treasure, the great library itself. Mara lifted another book from the pile, her hand steady now. She read aloud a passage of poetry that no alien could understand. Yet every human in the chamber nodded with recognition, their hearts stirred by the memory of home, and the sound of it filled the hall with a power that silenced denial. The Guardians lowered their spears, their eyes no longer glowing cold but dimmed with confusion. for their duty was to protect the library. Yet how could they bar its doors from the very people who had written its first volumes? How could they call unworthy the ones whose ink flowed in the oldest pages? Kalen watched them and saw the cracks forming. He knew that once the guardians faltered, the council could no longer enforce the lie. He spoke again, louder, his voice carrying across the chamber, saying that the library without humans was a body without a heart, a vessel without a soul. The elder scholar bowed his head, his hands trembling upon the table. He whispered that perhaps the truth had been feared, for knowledge is power, and to admit that humans were the first was to admit that the galaxy itself had been shaped by them, to admit that all who came after were students of forgotten teachers, and fear had led to silence. Silence had led to denial, and denial had led to the cruelty of casting humanity aside. But truth has a way of rising. Truth cannot be buried forever. And here it stood now, alive in ink and voice. Mara's eyes shone with tears, not of weakness, but of vindication. She declared that humanity did not come seeking pity. They came seeking their rightful place, to walk among the shells their ancestors had built, to learn again the wisdom they had once shared, and to remind the galaxy that no lie could erase the hand that writes. Her words struck the council like thunder, and Kalen saw the shame in their faces, the trembling in their voices. He saw pride rise in the humans, pride not of conquest, but of belonging, the pride of remembering who they had always been. The revelation was complete, the truth undeniable, and though some still muttered resistance, their words were hollow. The council could not erase what had been shown, the guardians could not erase what had been heard, and the library itself stood as a monument to humanity's forgotten greatness. The books whispered of it, the shelves echoed with it, the air carried the weight of it. Kalen felt the fire within him calm at last, for the truth was no longer his burden alone. It belonged now to all who had seen and heard. It was alive, it was free. And so the great library trembled, not from stone or storm, but from revelation. Its walls that once stood as barriers now seemed to bend. Its doors that once shut out humanity now seemed to wait. The galaxy itself shifted that day, for the forgotten writers had been revealed, their legacy uncovered, their voice restored. And though the path ahead would not be easy, though there would be struggle, though there would be fear, the truth had risen, and it could not be caged again. The library was not only galactic, it was human, and humanity had returned to claim it. The council chamber lay heavy with silence, the revelations still echoing in every corner. The guardians had lowered their weapons, the scholars sat pale and shaken, and the humans stood tall as though a long weight had finally lifted from their shoulders. Kalen felt the air itself change, charged with a new current, for truth once spoken does not vanish. It spreads, it roots itself in minds, it shakes the ground beneath lies. And he knew that from this moment forward nothing would remain as it was. The balance of power had already begun to shift. The elder who had confessed fear sat hunched over, his voice low as he muttered that the library without humans was hollow, that their exclusion had been an act of cowardice. Yet his words reached every ear like thunder, for when a council member speaks truth, it carries weight heavier than chains. Mara stepped forward, her gaze locked on the scholars, her voice sharp with resolve. She declared that humanity would no longer beg for entry. They would no longer stand at closed gates. They would walk the halls as equals, as rightful heirs to the wisdom within. The humans behind her raised their heads, pride gleaming in their eyes, their hands clenched at their sides as if to hold back tears. For too long they had been treated as outcasts, yet now the evidence spoke louder than any insult. The library itself bore their mark, its foundations built upon their words, its shelves stacked with their thoughts. And this truth gave them strength. The council shifted uneasily, some whispering that the order must be preserved, others whispering that the order had already crumbled. Kalen's voice joined Mara's, steady and firm, saying the galaxy could not deny the hand that first wrote. The guardians, those silent keepers of the library, finally moved forward, their armor clinking like distant bells. Their leader spoke with a voice that carried across the chamber. neither loud nor soft, but filled with weight. He admitted that the Guardians had known fragments of the truth, whispers passed from one generation to the next, never written, never shared, always hidden, for they had feared chaos. Feared what would happen if the galaxy learned that the youngest race was in truth the oldest. Yet seeing the humans read aloud from the ancient texts had shattered their resolve. They could hide it no longer. Gasps spread through the chamber. The scholars looked to one another with wide eyes. For if even the Guardians confessed, then the wall of denial was broken beyond repair. Mara's eyes narrowed, her voice rising with anger and pride. She asked why. Why had her people been made to suffer ignorance? Why had their children been told they were small while their ancestors had written words that shaped civilizations? Her demand rang like fire. And no one answered, for no one dared. Kalen stood beside her, his own voice carrying across the silence, saying that fear had guided the council, but fear could not hold forever. Whispers began to ripple beyond the chamber, the revelation already spreading to the outer halls where other scholars, students, and traders lingered, rumors flowing like rivers, carried by every tongue. Humanity's legacy was no longer a secret contained in stone walls. It was loose, alive, unstoppable. Kalen could almost feel the galaxy itself tilting, as if the stars recognized their forgotten teachers. The humans felt it too. Their faces lifted, their backs straightened, pride replacing shame, the power dynamic shifting with every heartbeat. The very order of knowledge was bending to acknowledge the truth that could not be undone. The council tried to regain control. Their leader raised a trembling hand and declared that though the truth was startling, it did not mean humanity should hold power. But his words were weak, hollow, for the evidence stood in ink and stone, in the voice of Mara reading. In the confession of the Guardians, Kalen stepped forward with calm defiance, his eyes meeting the leaders, and he declared that humanity did not need permission, for they were not outsiders asking entry. They were founders, reclaiming their own legacy. Their place was not given by the council. It was already theirs. The humans behind Mara spoke now, one by one, each voice adding strength. Some quoted lines from the ancient books. Others spoke of the pain of being denied. Others of the pride they now felt. Their voices joined into a chorus, a tide of words that filled the chamber with undeniable force. The scholars could not meet their eyes. The Guardians lowered their heads. The chamber trembled not from anger, but from awakening. Kalen's heart beat with both fear and joy, for he knew that this was the moment when history bent, the hinge upon which the future of the galaxy turned. The elder scholar finally rose again, his voice shaking yet clear. He declared that the council must recognize humanity as not merely guests, but as partners, as keepers of the library, for their voice was written in its oldest halls. Without them, the library was incomplete, and though some still resisted, their voices faltered, their arguments withered. The tide had already turned. Mara's eyes gleamed. Her lips curved with determination. She accepted not as a plea, but as a fact, for the shift of power was not a gift. It was the natural weight of truth correcting injustice. The chamber filled with murmurs as the decision spread, students and scribes already rushing to record what they had witnessed, word racing through corridors faster than any decree. Soon the galaxy itself would know, and once known it could not be hidden again. Kalen looked at Mara and saw fire in her eyes, a fire that promised more than entry. It promised change. He realized that humanity would not only reclaim their place, they would reshape the library. They would awaken knowledge long buried, and in doing so they would remind the galaxy that power comes not from fear, but from truth. The Guardians knelt then, lowering their heads before the humans, a gesture never seen before in living memory. The chamber gasped as the sight struck every soul, for Guardians bowed to none, not even the council. Yet here they bent their knee to the rightful authors of the library's first words. The symbolism was undeniable. The order of ages shattered in a single act. Mara placed her hand over her heart, her voice ringing clear. She declared that humanity accepted not as conquerors, but as custodians. They would protect the library as their ancestors had once done. They would guide it forward. Kalen's eyes burned with tears as he realized he was witnessing not only history but rebirth. The rebirth of a people once forgotten, once silenced, now risen, and the rebirth of the library itself. No longer a monument to selective memory, but to the full truth of the galaxy. The chamber swelled with awe and fear, for change is never gentle. Yet it had come, and none could resist. Humanity stood taller. The council bent lower, and the guardians bowed deepest of all, and Kalen whispered within his heart that this was the shift, the great turning, the beginning of a new age. The great library stood in silence after the storm of revelation, its vast halls glowing with the faint shimmer of ancient lights, its shelves whispering with the weight of forgotten voices, and its guardians still kneeling in recognition of the truth that could no longer be denied. Humanity had stepped into the chamber as outcasts, but they now stood as authors, their voices carrying not the bitterness of vengeance, but the strength of belonging. Kalen watched with awe as the council that once scoffed now bent their heads, their robes heavy with shame, their voices small in the presence of a truth greater than themselves. Mara stood at the center of the chamber, her hands steady upon the ancient book, her eyes bright with both triumph and tears. She spoke not with anger, but with certainty, declaring that humanity would not claim the library as conquerors. They would not strip it from the galaxy. Instead, they would protect it, they would honor it, they would breathe life into it once more, for the library was not meant to divide, but to unite, not meant to exclude, but to share. Her voice rang across the chamber like a bell, and all who heard felt its weight. The humans behind her stepped forward, some reaching out to touch the shelves, some whispering softly as if greeting old friends. For in every page they saw fragments of their forgotten past, and in every word they found echoes of their ancestors. Kalen felt his heart swell as he watched, for this was no mere victory. It was the return of a people to their own story, the reclaiming of a heritage long stolen, the rebirth of truth itself. The council shifted uneasily, their authority crumbling. Yet they knew they could not resist. The library had spoken, the words had chosen. The guardians rose slowly, their leader bowing once more to the humans, his voice deep as he pledged their loyalty not to the council, but to the truth within the pages, to the rightful keepers of the knowledge. He declared that from this day, the guardians would protect humanity as they protected the library, for they were one and the same. The chamber shook with gasps at his words, for such loyalty had never been given outside the council. Yet here it was, unshakable, undeniable. Mara accepted, with a nod, her expression solemn, for she understood the burden that came with such honor. Kalen stepped beside her, his voice rising to speak. He reminded all present that the library was not a weapon. It was a beacon, and now more than ever it must shine, for knowledge could heal the wounds of fear, could mend the fractures of distrust, and could build bridges between peoples. His words carried the conviction of one who had sacrificed safety for truth, and in his voice others heard the promise of renewal. The students in the halls leaned forward with shining eyes, scribes hurried to record, and whispers raced like wildfire through the galaxy that a new age had dawned. The humans began to explore the shelves, guided by instinct, as if their very blood remembered the pathways. They uncovered volumes none had dared open. They read aloud passages that had sat silent for centuries, and with each word spoken the library itself seemed to brighten, as if relieved to be recognized once more. Mara's hands brushed over titles that told of Earth's earliest dreams, of journeys across oceans, of struggles for freedom, of poems sung under starlight, her eyes filled with wonder, for here was proof that humanity's voice had never been lost. It had only been waiting for their return. Outside the chamber the galaxy stirred. Messages spread faster than light. Worlds whispered of the revelation, some in awe, some in fear, for if humans were the first writers, then the galaxy itself had been shaped by their thought. Empires that once looked down upon Earth now hesitated, unsure whether to bow in respect or bristle in defiance. Yet even the proudest rulers could not deny the evidence. For the library was truth itself, carved in ink and stone. No decree could erase it, and slowly, the balance of the galaxy began to bend, tilting toward a future no one had foreseen. The council tried to cling to fragments of power, their voices rising in desperate appeals. Yet their words carried no weight. They had hidden the truth. They had twisted the story. Their authority dissolved in the face of what had been revealed. And Kalen watched as the humans walked not with arrogance, but with quiet strength. For they did not need crowns. They did not need thrones. They had the words, the books, the memory. And that was greater than any rule. Mara raised her voice once more and declared that humanity would share their rediscovered knowledge freely, that no world would be denied. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Scholars of other races looked at the humans with awe. For generosity in the face of injustice is power greater than fear. Mara promised that humanity's return to the library was not the end, but the beginning, a new chapter in which every voice could find its place, a chapter where no people would be silenced, where no truth would be buried. Her words spread hope through the hall. Kalen felt it ripple in his chest. He saw it in the eyes of the humans and the aliens alike, the beginning of something larger than any of them. The Guardians raised their spears high, striking the floor in unison, a sound like thunder rolling through the chamber, a declaration of oath, of loyalty, of protection. The humans stood in the center, bathed in the glow of ancient light, their silhouettes framed by the shelves of wisdom. And Kalen knew he was witnessing a moment that would be remembered for millennia, the moment when the outcasts became the keepers, when the silenced became the voice, when the forgotten became the foundation. The library itself seemed to breathe, as if awakening from a long slumber, alive again with purpose and pride. As the chamber emptied, as the council faded into shadows of their former power, Mara and Kalen walked together through the vast halls. The humans followed, their steps echoing with the sound of belonging. They passed shelves that stretched like forests, glowing with ancient texts, and for the first time humanity walked without chains, without shame. They walked as heirs, as builders, as teachers. Kalen whispered that the library would never be the same. Mara smiled faintly and replied that neither would the galaxy. For once truth is freed, it shapes the future. It writes its own story. It cannot be contained. And so the great library opened, not to the few, but to all, with humanity at its heart once more. The words that had been denied now flowed freely. The power that had been hidden now shone like a star. The galaxy shifted on its axis, and a new chapter began, not written by the council, not guarded in fear, but crafted by the very people who had given birth to the first words. Humanity, the forgotten authors, now revealed, now restored, now eternal in the halls of knowledge where their voice would echo forever.